Hi, my name is Fritzi Horstman, founder of the Compassion Prison Project, and welcome to Compassion in Action. My guest today is Michael Gurian, and I want to start with a quote from his book, The Wonder of Boys. If they are not taught otherwise, boys will destroy in order to prove they are men. If a gang is available, it gives the boy a sense of mission, birthright, and purpose. The boy will defend that new birthright, however misguided, with his life. So Michael Gurian wrote this book, The Wonder of Boys, and so many other books about the brain science that exists within the young men and the young women in the world. And this is such a crucial, I think this is such a crucial topic because, you know, we want from what we observe, we want to make a decision about what is. And when we dive down into the biology, into the neurobiology of a gender, we get more information. And my beliefs and my understanding as a woman has changed just because I've read his books and starting to understand why my husband and my son are different than me, why they need to, they do things like this with each other. They're playing, it's called aggressive nurturance. And it just seemed weird to me and it seemed kind of violent to me. But in fact, this is actually helping my son rewire his brain into a more pro-social, executive functioning human because of what my husband is doing with him. And it's things that come naturally to my husband, I would never think of doing in a million years. And so it's these distinctions that are crucial in how we approach raising our children. And so I'm going to read Dr. Gurian's bio so you can get a sense how extraordinary he is. Dr. Michael Gurian is a marriage and family counselor in private practice and the New York Times bestselling author of 32 books published in 23 languages. As a social philosopher, he has pioneered efforts to bring neurobiology and brain research into homes, schools, corporations, and public policy. The Gurian Institute, which he co-founded, conducts research internationally, launches pilot programs, and trains professionals. Michael has spoken for the United Nations on violence against women, provided information on boys' and girls' educational needs to the White House, and briefed members of the 114th Congress on the boy crisis in America. A number of Michael's books have sparked national debate, including The Wonder of Boys, The Wonder of Girls, Boys and Girls Learn Differently, and Leadership and the Sexes. I'm sure this podcast may be contributing to the debate, and I'm open for it. But whatever you decide, I hope you will listen, but also think about the men and women living in prison. 95% of the people in prison are men. And so if you ask me, we need to focus some of our resources and our research into re-guiding the youth, the male youth, into more programs that help them develop into pro-social men. So without further ado, Michael Gurian, welcome to Compassion in Action. I'm so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So Michael, let's just jump right into it. The brain of a young boy, the brain of a man. Can you tell us what the differences are and why it's so important to make sure we encompass these differences into our society?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I throughout humanity, let's say, you know, from the beginning of time, if we go back a million years, development of human brain, you know, cultures knew that there were differences between boys and girls, that and that's not an issue of equality. Obviously, there was a lot of inequality, but this isn't an issue of equality. This is that boys and girls have some nature to them. So I talk about nature, nurture, and culture. I think they all work together, but we got to start in nature. And when we're raising boys, we have to understand them as boys. No matter where they are on the spectrum, gender spectrum, they're boys. So that means, for instance, you know, the male brain uses up to 7 times more gray matter activity than the female brain. So gray matter is in splotches and white matter activity is throughout the brain. So, boys
Mm.
tend to focus and they get focused on something, right? And that's good. We want them to focus and we want to figure out what's that focus. And there's going to be more than one thing and lead them through the focus. They're not going to tend to multitask as much, and it's going to cause some difficulties in learning for them because the educational system is set up much better for a female brain, a multitasking, very verbal brain. Um, Girls do and women do words on both sides of the brain. Males, boys, men, we do words mainly on the left side. So that's another profound difference because girls and women are connecting words to feelings and words to senses and words to memories really fast in comparison to boys. And of course, there are some boys, like I'm a writer, there's some very verbal boys, of course. But in terms of overall word use, no matter the country, reading, writing, and speaking together, women and girls use more words. Um, Boys use less and connect less to these feelings and so on. So we, in helping boys, right, we need to know that, and we need to figure out ways to reach boys and men that work for boys and men. And those are just a few of the differences.
And one of the things you also mention is spatial, being in space. Like a ball being in space is something that is exciting for a boy.
It's another profound difference. So um, the word centers are on both sides of the brain for females, for girls and women, mainly on the left for males. So what are males doing on the right? Yeah, right. It's not empty. No, it's very busy. What they're doing is more of what are called spatial mechanicals and visual graphics. And girls, and we all have each other's stuff. So girls and women do those too. But because on the male brain, that space isn't used up with word centers, or to some extent used up with word centers, our spatial mechanical and our visual graphic tend to be more of the gray matter areas that we're operating out of. So objects moving through space is spatial mechanical. And from a very early age, every parent recognizes this when they have boys and girls. They can see that the boys' eyes are moving with objects. Like the girl's eyes are moving more toward the caregiver, the boys' eyes are moving toward objects that are in space, like mobiles. And again, both girls and boys like mobiles, but when we do research and we study what their eyes are doing and what their attention and focus is, we see that boys are moving toward objects in space. And as they get a little older and they can crawl and walk, they are very interested in objects moving through space. Their own bodies become objects that move through space. They're jumping on each other, wrestling, all of that. And they also they're throwing things. And even when you give them dolls, when we give boys dolls and we give girls dolls, anyone can play with dolls, of course, but when we study them and we look statistically at what they do, boys are much more likely to use the doll as an object that he throws through space. And girls are more likely, with all that emotional stuff going on in there, the white matter activity, they're more likely to treat the doll as a living person and talk to the doll as a living person. Boys, much less likely. They're much more likely to throw the dolls around, bang their heads together and all that, because to the boy, it's a plastic object, which, by the way, it is. you know the boy's brain, and then he pulls the arms apart, more spatial mechanical, pulls the head off, tries to put it back together. That's spatial mechanical. And visual graphics, like video games, visuals, and all of that. And we can talk about that. So these are more advanced in more boys. And I always say there's nothing wrong with that. That's how their brains are set up. So let's use that.
Exactly. And so I have an 18-year-old boy son, and I try and relate to him the way I would relate to my friends, which is I want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to go into his room and process the emotions. And I see my husband working with him and talking with him, and they're flicking at each other, they're hurting each other. And I'm like, what? To me, that's violence, but that's what I'm
Yeah.
learning this is aggression. And so,
Aggression, yeah.
so the other thing about the brain of a male is that aggression is part of it's the testosterone. Can you talk about that, the
Yep.
testosterone aggression thing? Because that's crucial to the work I'm doing in prisons to understand the difference here.
Yeah, really, really important, because violence is I'm trying to destroy you. Could be a nation state, could be me hitting you, being violent to you, domestic violence. That violence is I'm trying to destroy you. trying to destroy your core self, um, including killing you. Aggression is healthy. Aggression is, I'm trying to challenge you. So I'm going to challenge you. That's aggression. And that can include sometimes manipulating. That can be a form of aggression. Control. I can try to control. Control can be aggression. It can also become violence. So aggression is much more challenge. And that's built into all of us as human beings. Women are aggressive too. But with males, aggression nurturance is the concept, my concept for how males tend to nurture. Like you're two guys who are causing pain to each other. That is really, really common. And it is a way they nurture each other. And it often to women and to some very sensitive men, it looks weird and we don't like it, let's say. But we got to remember, male body has fewer nerve endings. We have a higher pain threshold because we have fewer nerve endings. And I want to just put in parentheses, people will say, wait, that's not right. Women give birth to children. There's nothing more painful than that. And that's true. And that's at a specific time.
Yes,
When
it's
we look
more.
at the lifespan, right? When we look at the lifespan, women tend to try to avoid pain, and men often go into pain. So it's not just that we can take more pain, but it's that the pain becomes a badge of courage, a badge of honor. We love the wound, we love the scab over the wound. Oh, look, I broke my arm, and a lot of that is because we're advancing and developing by using pain. And some of that means inflicting it in aggression nurturance, like the snapping or tapping someone on the head. Or there was the famous show, he's gone now, but NCIS, where the head of it, which was Mark Harmon at that time, he's retired, but he was a captain, and he would slap the back of the heads of his fully grown coworkers, to wake them up. Well, that's aggression nurturance. And you see thousands of examples of this. So when it turns to violence, it's violence. And that's what we want to stop as a society. But what we've tended to do with boys and men is not understand that they relate through aggression nurturance. So number one, we've overreacted to aggression nurturance. We thought it was violence. We called any aggression violence. And number two, we haven't used aggression nurturance to heal, to help, to nurture, because we're so afraid that everything is violence. And it's not. For males, they often nurture each other and advance each other forward, and take care of each other via aggression nurturance. And I'm a dad of two daughters. I definitely used aggression nurturance with my daughters. I didn't physically hit them or
Yeah.
anything, but I used it because it's in my DNA. Males have 10 to 20 times more testosterone moving through their systems per day, per moment. And so testosterone is an aggression chemical. So without our even realizing it, we're going to use aggression. And what we hopefully will do, and what we do in most cases, is we use it to nurture. So we're challenging to nurture. And what we're building is resilience. And that's kind of been the male task throughout history and the father's task throughout history. There are many tasks, but one of them is, I'm going to make you resilient. And one of the ways I'm going to make you resilient, little kid, is I'm going to use aggression nurturance with you.
It's so interesting because it's kind of counterintuitive to everything I do, and then seeing it in my husband. But after reading your books, like I said to my husband yesterday, I was like, thank you so much for being in my son's life and giving him the guidance and understanding. Because, when he storms off into his room, I just want to go back in there and say, let's talk. And my husband's like, just wait, just let him be. And I don't have this understanding of the male mind. And I think that's why fatherhood is so important.
Right.
And I'm getting the value and importance of fatherhood. And so the people in prison that I work with, money, like I think it's 80% didn't have a father figure
Right.
growing up. And so I have a few questions around this whole thing, but I guess the first one is, can you explain the importance of a father but also competition, right? How competition is such an important piece to inspire into the child. All these things. So
Right. Well, I think I can try to connect them, and if I go on too long, cut me off. The competition part is part of aggression nurturance. So human beings, men, women, everybody, we're built to compete. Nature is hierarchical. Nature is deadly, right? Nature is dangerous. Um, uh, we are built to compete, and that means we're competing, quote unquote, man against nature, which we all learned in middle school, right? Human, let's say, against nature is, and competition is the way that we hierarchically work together to solve problems. Obviously, gaming is the most obvious example. Watching football, that's competition. Uh, but it's aggression nurturance. So we're competing. We're also nurturing through aggression. And girls and women obviously compete. And the Olympics, incredible women competing, female soccer team. So everyone competes. Everyone can do aggression nurturance. Um, the father, okay, so part of what the father embodies and what we really want him to embody is we want him to use the aggression nurturance, kind of simultaneously to the mom, who more moms will tend to use what I call empathy nurturance, which is verbal empathy nurturance, which relies more on the verbals and the empathy, right? And if there's pain, the mirror neurons in the mom, which are in the midbrain, the insula, mirror neurons flash through the mom as soon as she sees her child in pain, or a woman sees someone in pain, or a girl. Like, we all have mirror neurons, but when in females, that insula is set up to create more mirror neurons. And the oxytocin cells, which are the bonding chemistry that moms and women have more of than males, that increases the mirror neurons. Okay. So then she stops everything, right, to try to help. But the male brain set up differently. The insula might get some mirror neurons. It'll get mirror neurons when it sees the child in pain or the person in pain. But the testosterone cells tend to kill off these mirror neurons. So the brain of the dad, let's say, will go, yeah, that kid's okay. Yeah, okay, let's go forward. It's time to compete, or expand that to whatever. It's time to do the yard, or it's time to mow the lawn, or whatever. You're okay. So I had some mirror neurons, and I've ascertained you're fine. And so now, and even if you have a little cut, okay, yeah, that'll heal. Go forward. So so that's actually a good thing, that fathers and mothers are different. And we always want to say there's overlap. There's some highly sensitive men who parent much more like a mom, et cetera. We want to include all of that. But on average, the fathers, the way that they are helping the brain to move activity from the midbrain to the top of the brain. Top of the brain is where we're going to have choice making, executive decision making, impulse control, all that. The way males do it is much more through this aggression nurturance, and much less through the empathy nurturance. And what we understand from all the fatherhood research that you're referring to and experience is that without the father, and we need to include male role models if the father is gone in some way, male role models, without them, so without the father influence, our brains, the brains of children, don't develop as well. And so, for instance, rough and tumble play, that's got a lot of research on that. Fathers tend to do rough and tumble play. Moms tend to do it less for all these biochemical reasons. And when you take that fathering and take the rough and tumble play out, kids turn out to be less sensitive, less empathic, less executive decision making, right? Less self-control, etc. And you might say it's counterintuitive. A lot of women will say this. A lot of people will say this because they're like, well, wait, rough and tumble play often causes harm, and it can go too far and all of that. So how can it actually create more executive decision making? And the reason it does is that rough and tumble play, like aggression nurturance, creates these synapses connections between the midbrain and the top of the brain. And maturity is about moving brain activity to the top of the brain. That's what maturity is. The more mature we are, the more we're using our frontal lobe, etc. We take the father out, we're not having that brain development. So we're ending up with a lot of 18, 22, 25, 30-year-olds, 15-year-olds who don't have that brain development. And so they're doing things that are violent, that are harmful. And what they show is they show lack of impulse control, lack of good executive decision making, right? Lack of self-regulation. These are all things that would develop if we could get the brain to fully develop. But because we lack the father, we've taken a huge piece out of brain development. And especially if you got guys, men, they're going to grow up and their brains have not matured fully. And they're going to do these things. And because they're males and the way the male brain is set up, they're going to tend more toward physical violence than females are.
So there's a quote in your book. You said in many of your books, but and this is in The Wonder of Boys.
Uh-huh.
Boys must find ways to compete and see themselves as performing well. If they do not, if society does not provide them with these opportunities, they'll compete against society itself, abusing their community and themselves. And then one more quote, because this will all tie in. In our ancestral past, it was assumed a boy would become a soldier one day. It was assumed he would develop through his culture into a boy or man who would potentially sacrifice his life for a greater cause. So these two questions about being prepared for the military, which is a higher goal, a purpose, like giving a young boy purpose and direction, but also sacrifice for a higher cause. And this is what happens when boys join gangs. They don't have the military to look for or the sports to look forward to, their higher cause. So can you speak about
Yep.
that confluence?
Yes. Wired into us is provide and protect. This is wired into women as well. It is somewhat differently though. And so for all of human history until about 10,000 years ago, so for that sort of first million years or 800,000 years, what males were doing was hunting. So their purpose was, and they were being raised to hunt because that was providing and protecting. And they had to, like the family, the tribe, the community could not survive if they didn't hunt and bring back food. Meanwhile, women were doing roots and tubers. They were doing what we call gathering activities. So that was food, and that was crucial, absolutely. But it wasn't all. Like the men also needed to hunt and bring that back so everyone could survive and thrive. And then the other thing that men did was male-specific nurturing, which I call task-specific empathy. So where you do a task together, like competing, playing football, whatever it is, and that's task-specific empathy. So you have empathy, but it's specific to the task. And the task is a hunting task. So all sports are actually hunting tasks, right? There's a ball. There's an object moving through space. It's a ball or whatever the object is. And we form a hunting team and we are hunting that ball. It's a quest for that ball, and we carry that ball to the end zone or wherever it is. This is a direct residual of hunting. It's in the DNA. And again, women can do it. But for males, it's that providing, protecting is so in the DNA. And then what's also in the DNA is self-sacrifice. So they knew going in that they were going to be raised to sacrifice themselves. And that became especially clear with war and soldiering. So about 10,000 years ago, we became agrarian, more agriculture, more, less need for nomadic hunting and more growing our own crop. And then we started having population growth. So then we started having war, right? War over resources, et cetera. And so what became a hunter became a soldier. Still a hunter, but now we move into war and soldiering. And so for the last 10,000 years, the way the DNA has worked for males is, you're gonna at some point sacrifice yourself for something. It might be that you become a soldier. Not every male will. It might be. But even if you don't become a soldier, you're still going to provide and protect. And you're still going to use task-specific empathy, and you're still going to compete, and you're still going to climb a hierarchy, to get ahead and to bring back food and money for your family. And you're going to sacrifice yourself. And that's noble. And you should. Like that's built in. So when I look at gangs and I look at prisons, and I haven't worked as much in prisons as you have, but I have over the decades worked quite a bit in prisons and run men's groups in prisons. And when I talk to people in prisons, it's so clear that they have the urge, it's in the DNA. They want to provide, they want to protect. And of course, they go in a direction for that where it good executive decision making isn't happening. And in part, there's so much poverty, and they simply have to attach themselves to a gang that where they will sacrifice themselves. Many of them will be dead by 25, right? Many will be dead by 25, especially in inner cities. So they will sacrifice themselves, but they'll do drugs, sell drugs, whatever it is to bring money in, and so I see them fulfilling the urge and the primal directive, and I see them. Another thing I talk about is the performance imperative versus the intimacy imperative. Oxytocin is a chemical that females have much more of, and it's an intimacy chemical. It creates an intimacy imperative. It's a bonding. It's called the tend and befriend chemical. So females are bonding and talking with each other and creating those connections, and they will sacrifice themselves in childbirth, which luckily females don't have to very much anymore. Um, uh, and they will sacrifice the self, the person. They'll give up who they are to take care of their families. And then, at midlife, many women will say, I have no self. Well, they did. They sacrificed themselves to take care of their families, but they won't tend to sacrifice their physical bodies. In other words, they won't tend to go into a situation where they're going to get killed. And males are more likely to take that risk. And testosterone is a reason. It's a risk chemical. They're more likely to take those risks. And they've got the performance imperative. So they really want to perform. Testosterone is a real performance chemical. I want to perform. I'm going to climb that hierarchy. And even if they're making bad decisions that will make them, end them up in prison, they are still, they're still selling the product. They're still trying to do it. They're still doing what their gang leader tells them to do. They're still trying to perform. So these imperatives are built in. And of course, what we want is a society in which we can help every male develop into a good man, without needing to, join gangs. In other words, we want to give him a tribe and a community that nurtures him, and parents, obviously, that nurture him, so that he doesn't have to perform in these ways that are ultimately destructive to himself. And also, as you said, the African proverb that I use in there, if we don't light the fire in them the right way, they're going to burn down the village. So yeah, and that's a lot of what we see with men and women who are in prison, is they've got the imperative, but it went in a way that was destructive to themselves and others.
Yes, and so one of your solutions is the three families.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how we can create this? And I want to actually expand the reach to creating that in prisons as well, so that men can start feeling like they can be part of the family while they're incarcerated, and women too.
Yeah. I just saw today, just literally an hour before I came on with you, on one of these listservs I'm on, a study about how much more likely prisons are to allow women, moms, to have contact with their children than men, dads. And, it's literally what we're talking about here. We want men to be raised in a three-family system, obviously women and girls as well, to be raised in a three-family system and to be part of a three-family system. So we don't want to cut them off from their kids. So, okay, so the three families are, and the three-family system model, it's my name for it, the three-family system model, but I think people will recognize that it's historical, that this is how all of our ancestors, no matter our race, where we came from, were raised in the past. There was a nuclear family unit. It may not have looked like a man-woman nuclear family like we think of now, but it was a nuclear family unit. So it could have been man-woman. Now we know it could be two men, two women, et cetera. So it's going to be a nuclear unit. It's going to be a small unit, and we hope for two parents in that unit. And so that's the first family. Then wrapped around it is the second family. So everyone will recognize this: extended family, aunts, uncles, et cetera. In the last, say, 100 years, especially in America, where we could be removed from our fathers who might be working somewhere else, or maybe our moms, removed from our grandparents who may live across country. The second family has become, mentors, maybe even older brothers if they're much older, coaches, teachers with whom I'm really close. So not all teachers, they'd be third family, but the teacher who is my who has changed my life. Okay, so that would be like an aunt or uncle. So the second family, it wraps around the first. And in other cultures, like I lived in India for 2 years, taught in Turkey for 2 years. When I look at those cultures and do studies there, you can see the second family is still more active. Like you can see that, for instance, in India, when we lived there, I lived there when I was quite young. My father taught there. You could see that the kids were having kids at 13 and 14, but they weren't even forming a nuclear unit yet. The grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles took care of the kids as these 13 and 14-year-olds still had to grow up. So like you can starkly see extended family and how it works. And in some of the communities that prisoners come from, they can starkly see it, that there are grandmas, grandpas, and uncles who are trying to help them. And at the same time, they'll see that not only was the dad gone for them, perhaps, but also that they may not have had access. They may not have had mentors. They may not have had coaches. And in fact, they may have only had like one grandma who helped them, but no grandpas around, no uncles around. So they'll have a deficit generally in the nuclear family, and it's generally a dad deficit, could be mom, and they'll see a deficit in the second family. And that includes they may not have had good schools. They may not have had mentors and teachers in those schools to help them. Okay, and then the third family that wraps around the second, which wraps around the first, is generally the larger tribe or culture. So in the old days, it would be more tribe. In the last, 100, 200, even to 500 years, we could say culture. So now that third family system would be larger cultural institutions, could be churches, churches, synagogues, mosques. It could be schools, right? They're big institution, and et cetera, whatever would be the institution. And now, like programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters, boys clubs, girls clubs, all of these programs, what they're doing is they're saying we're going to be the third family because the culture's too big, because the school's not very good, because maybe the kids aren't in a faith community or they're not bonded with people in the faith community. We're going to be the third family. And that's very necessary because kids, so the human brain, it needs to develop in three families. And so we don't want deficits in those three families. So we want the three families to exist that are wrapping around the kid to raise the kid. And then we want to try to get rid of deficits. So we want to have a father, not lack a father. And if the father is in prison or has been killed or something, then we want male role models to be like the father. And then we want the grandmas, grandpas, we want all that. And so if there's a deficit, then we go, okay, wait a minute, where are the men? I mean, often it's a deficit of the grandpas, uncles, male mentors. And it's part of why these guys join gangs, because they get them there. They get the male mentors in the gang. So we want them there. And then we want the third family to exist. We want the church, if it could have an influence, please have an influence. Yep, not everyone will go to church, but still, we would love that. And then we would love the schools to provide mentors to be good schools for these guys, and that will mean they'll have to understand male energy. They'll have to understand how to reach males and not just keep punishing and shaming males for being bad learners. All that will have to happen in all three families, I think, really, for us to solve a lot of our social problems.
Well, so what's happening in prisons in California is they're creating mentor groups. So the older men in prison are mentoring the youth, the 18 to 25-year-olds. So this is at least an attempt to begin to create the second family, is what I'm gathering.
It is.
But what we really have here, our prisons are a third family. And so once prisons realize that this is a place where we can help our children while we're serving our time and make this a porous relationship where we involve the fathers and mothers with their children in a more dynamic way, we can actually have an impact in raising our children. And I think that's one of the things about prison that I see with so many of the men and women I work with is the pain of not being able to help and raise the children out there. And luckily, phone calls are becoming free. And there's texting now, and I'm, about adverse childhood experiences. One of them is having a household member in prison. So all the people in prison, most of them are fathers or mothers. And so they're creating one ace there. So we need to be aware of this and then take action. And
Beautiful. Yep.
you say lack of fathering is one of the primary crises of our time. Father gives direction for the testosterone between the ages of 10 and 20. Boys are wired to need a culture which creates special guidance, discipline, and structure. And so that's what you're finding with gangs. They want the discipline, they want the structure. They get that in a gang, but it's antisocial and it destroys, as you say.
Yep.
And
Yep.
yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So what now? So we have this limitation, which is called prison, in raising our sons. How can we, as a community and a society, bring resources that will actually fill this gap, but also involve the fathers and the mothers, but also shift the system, because nothing seems to be working.
Yeah. Right. So staying with prisons for a moment, as the institution, which you so wonderfully said, they're a third family, even second family. Um, uh, so certain things we have to do, which I know one is we got to work on parent-child connection. And as you know, what I'm saying about fatherlessness among the young males, true for the women too. Most of the women in prison, right? Also fatherless households. So we need to help the moms and dads who are in prison to have contact and keep that relationship going. Because even let's say a father for right now, no, we'll just say a parent, even a parent in prison has a lot to teach a child. Not only has a lot of love to give, but has a lot to teach. Like, okay, here's why I'm here. Don't do that. I mean, every parent wants to raise the next generation, right, to do better than they did. So, so whether you're in prison or not in prison, that's wired into us as parents. So there's so much that incarcerated parents can teach their kids and so much love they can give. So we've got to change the system so that we absolutely make sure all that contact is happening. And if there's someone who's really unhealthy, okay, we can make that decision. And we can say, okay, not you. You can't have contact with your child right now because you have this mental illness, or or you're saying things that are bad. You can't say. We can do that on a case-by-case basis, but the system should support that kind of contact, because the father or mother is still first family.
Yes.
So and then the mentoring programs, and especially men's groups, well, they're both great. I'm going to especially look at men's groups for a moment. I think it's possible in a prison for every man and hopefully every woman to be in a group. So sticking with men, since women tend to do more tend and befriend anyway, with men, getting them in the group, which they're going to already join gang somewhat on race, right? In the last 30 to 40 years, it's been somewhat on race that they join groups in prison. They can also, though, join other groups that don't involve the same race, that have diversity, or, if necessary, form men's groups using counseling resources or mentoring resources, form men's groups that stay within the group they're already in, but form this small group of like-minded men, who, group of 5 to 10. And as they bond with each other and as they work together, they're going to work on things as a group. They're fulfilling the primal directive. They're going to be hunting. They're going to be working on issues of providing and protecting. That stuff will come up. All sorts of stuff will come up that is visceral and primal for them. And they'll be with other men in a brotherhood that allows them to both be resilient and vulnerable. Because at times in the group, they're going to be vulnerable. They're going to even cry. They're going to talk about things, or if they're not criers, they're still going to feel vulnerable, and their voices, their throats are going to close up because they're going to remember things, like especially regrets they have. Like, that's a way in prison you can really get inside guys once they start their regrets, and their sense of failure. And that's okay. They can work on that, and then it helps them to be resilient. And so that's what we're really trying to do in a group, right? We're trying to help them to be vulnerable, but not because that's our social agenda for men, But because by being vulnerable, they can also become resilient and become more resilient so that when they leave prison, they have the resilience to not fall back into the patterns that will bring them back to prison. So they form these groups that become like second family. And then in terms of third family, the prison system itself, I mean, obviously a prison system is dealing with a lot of stuff, but the prison system itself, what it has to do now is it has to be able to differentiate males who are mentally ill, who need specific care for the mental illness that they have. That's gonna be a group of men. They absolutely will exist. The incredibly violent males, which is part of mental illness, because violence, right? 30 years ago, the AMA said violence is an illness. We need to treat it as an illness. So that's a group. We can't lump everyone else in, though. We have to differentiate because most of the men who are there are not mentally ill, and we're going to need to give them services, understanding, addiction recovery. Like we're going to need to do things with them that are probably not what we're going to immediately do with mentally ill people, right? And we got to make that distinction, separate the groups out, and be giving services for everyone as they need them. And to me, that's just really good diversity. We got to differentiate between groups of people and individuals and give them services. And so that's how the third family can help. Going to need more funding probably, and going to need funding to go toward that. So go toward hiring the counselors to come in and help. Just like they hire the psychiatrist to help the mentally ill, hiring the counselors to come in and help those who are not mentally ill, but who need other services.
Well, we have actually a peer-to-peer group that's been working well with our curriculum. But another thought, though, is since most of these men, excuse me, grew up without fathers, is it also possible for them to reparent each other in these groups? Because
that's what they do. Yep.
So it is a reparenting, which is what I'm seeing and observing as these magnificent men start emerging from their own rehabilitation. They're starting to realize who they really are and their sense of purpose. And most of the men want to let the youth know that prison isn't where it's at. They want them to know this. And so one of the things we've done is we've created a website, which we're still working on, called Messages to Youth, with all the information and wisdom from the men and women in prison.
Great.
So now back to the community. And I was reading some of the school model that you had, where the boys it was an all male school. Like it was an important thing for the men, for the young men, while they're in these marginalized communities. And I think it was African American you were specifically focused on, but I think it's an important distinction that boys without fathers need probably an all male school so they can get the guidance from the coaches and the mentors, but in a male way, instead of being distracted by the females. I mean, am I speaking out of turn, or is that?
I know what you're saying. Yeah. There are many ways, obviously, for young males to get males in the three family system. They don't have to go to a boys' school to get that, right? So, but you're referring, I think, yes, to the section, and you're referring to the section where people ask me, okay, which boys should go to a boys' school, and which girls should go to a girls' school? Because while most schools are co-ed, some schools, right, are single sex. And if I take the word should out of there and I just go, well, boys' schools can work really well especially for unfathered, right? Or father lost or father deprived. Because as you're saying, yeah, a father deprived child doesn't have to go to a boys' school, but if he goes to a boys' school, and we want to, of course, make sure it's a good school on all the other parameters of what a good school is, he's getting a lot of this male influence. He'll still have female teachers. I mean, a lot of teachers at boys' schools are female, but in things like the coaching, the sports, in those areas, he's going to be bonding generally with older men who are committed to mentoring boys. Like part of why they work at a boys' school. And by the way, it's the same for girls and women with girls. these guys are committed to mentoring boys. This is part of where they get their joy, right? And because they chose a boys' school, they probably get paid less, at this school than they'd get over here, but they chose it. So here are men who want to mentor, and so in a sense want to father the unfathered boy. And because they're male, and also because they probably have some training, they kind of get males. They sort of get how to, so the boys are getting influence from the female teachers for sure, and they're getting influence from these guys who instinctively know how to put a boy in his place and yet not destroy his resilience. They know how to guilt the boy, but not totally shame the boy, so to where it destroys the core self. Like, they get it. And when they make errors, they get corrected, but they get it. And so that's why I was saying that especially unfathered boys might find a safe home, and good development in a boys' school. Boys' schools, however, will never be the majority. Co-ed schools are always going to be the majority of schools. And so part of what I and the Gurian Institute does is we train co-ed schools. We train all schools, most of which are co-ed, try to help men and women in the co-ed schools also to be able to work with these boys to help father them, especially if they're underfathered at home.
And fathering would get them into their cortex more, right? When we're properly, we want them here so that they can focus and get their schoolwork done. A lot of the people in prison drop out of school. And you gave a long list. You gave a long list of, and it's more men, it's more boys than girls that have all of the issues, including more violence at home. And so I just, because I work with trauma, that's my sweet spot right now. But the destruction of the core self happens in trauma, usually physical and emotional abuse and neglect. And so when a child has this core self, destroyed, is that one of the reasons we have violence? Is that, what do you think what do you think creates violence? Because what did you say? Violence, aggression versus violence. We have aggression. This is a male thing. So how do we devolve into violence? And I did it. I had 8 aces as a child, so I learned violence as well. So can you elaborate on that?
Yes, there are. So, quite often in the culture or in places, people talk about violence as caused by toxic masculinity or masculinity. We hear that a lot. So that's a culture frame. That's not where violence comes from. So, and I think it's important to say that because there's a difference between using a culture frame and actual causation. And so I, of course, as you know, take a much more scientific point of view. I'm not a sociological culture warrior, right? I'm a scientist. And from that point of view, when we study causation in the brain, there are 3 potential causes for violence. One of them is environmental neurotoxins. So endocrine disruptors, all the stuff that's in food, especially junk food, that's in fertilizer, all those things are chemicals that do not allow synapses to work in the brain, that invade cellular development. And violence, especially for males, is one of the outcomes of that invaded cellular development. That's a very hard one to track because, how do you isolate junk food to prove that junk food caused that act of violence? However, we have just reams of research showing that cellular cause. The second cellular cause is trauma. So trauma, as you just said, it attacks the cells of the brain, right? It attacks the cells of the body, also of the brain. So, so what trauma does it? How much does it? For what person? What quality of trauma? One person has the same quality and quantity of trauma, but doesn't become violent. This other person has the same quality and quantity of, but becomes violent.
Right.
Right. So some of that is their own personality genetics and how trauma affects those genetics. But the trauma, right, is definitely a cellular cause. And then the third is under attachment. So that's the lack of fathering. It's also could be the lack of mothering, and it's the lack of nurturing in systems, like three family systems. And so when you have under attachment or lack of attachment, that is a trauma to the brain, but we're separating that in a separate category because it's within a relational system. And so in the trauma category, you could see your dad hitting your mom or killing your mom. Okay, right? I mean, that's, as you know, that's one of the ACEs. And that one, that's such a significant trauma that we can directly connect that to violence later. With under attachment, you're not seeing your father or mother kill the other person. You're just not nurtured enough. You don't have enough attachment. And it started when you were really young, and all the way through, you just didn't get enough attachment. So again, usually it's lack of father attachment. Direct causal link. So those three things are what cause, right, our cells, our bodies, our brains to become violent. And the whole masculinity, toxic masculinity, you're violent because you were taught that you shouldn't cry, or you're violent because you were taught not to talk about your feelings. That's not causation. It's a framework to talk about things, and we certainly want to help boys and men cry more if they need to cry, and we want them to be more emotionally vulnerable and talk about their feelings, absolutely. But a man who doesn't talk about his feelings does not become violent
Right.
unless there's some other causation. And I always say to people when I talk to audiences about this, look, you got to remember that until very recently, no men talked about their feelings. I'm exaggerating and joking, but like talking about your feelings was really low on the priority list for our great grandfathers all the way back to hunter gatherers. It was not a male thing. So certainly a man talked to his wife, and yeah, but it was not a male thing. And not all of these guys became violent. So I'm always trying to get people to say, look, he may not be talking about his feelings at this moment, and he may not be crying at this moment, but that's not what caused him to be violent. What caused him to be violent are these other things. And so these are the things we need to work on. And that means we gotta have attachment. We gotta cut down on the trauma. And I also beg people to look at the environmental neurotoxins.
So I have to wrap up now. So a person watching this in prison, what is your recommendation for their own improvement in their lives, in their lives of their children, and in their lives of their families? What advice do you have for them going forward so they can change their lives and their communities' lives?
I think just pick one. We've said a lot here, and just pick one to focus on right now. Like, okay, I know I'm the prisoner now. I know I was underfathered. All right, I'm gonna pick a male mentor. I'm going to bond with that male mentor. And it may be to get access to that male mentor, he needs to join a men's group. So um, uh, pick that. If it's trauma, if listening, and the person says, oh yeah, okay, I see that my violence or the mistakes I made, came from trauma. Okay, then pick that. Work on that in counseling, if they have a counseling system, or in talking with each other, in kind of peer counseling, work on that trauma and bring that trauma up, and sort of sacrifice that trauma to the fire, give that trauma away. And that's going to mean looking back at it. And it's also going to mean letting it go over a period of time, because it'll take time. And understanding that, wait a minute, I'm resilient. I'm resilient. I don't need to do that anymore. So pick one and work on that one thing right now.
Michael Gurian, thank you so much for your wisdom and your research and the lives that you've changed throughout school systems throughout the world. And I may follow up with you to see what else we can bring to the prison systems, because it's becoming more porous and it's time, all hands on deck. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael Gurian, for your wisdom and your perspective and the information that you've given us about the male and testosterone and biology of the male and how important mentors and fathers are in the development of both men and women. I think this conversation must continue. We have lots to cover, but I hope everyone here really understands the difference between aggression versus violence, and that male tendencies are to be aggressive, and it's aggressive nurturance. What an interesting distinction that is. And I see it in my son and my husband all the time. And what seemed really weird to me now makes sense. I think this topic is so crucial, and I hope for the people living in prison, if you found this interesting, I'm going to have another conversation with Dr. Gurian. Please write any questions that you have, and we'll bring them up in the next conversation, because he gave two really great pieces of advice to the people in prison, to the men, especially in prison, is to either find a mentor or really work on your trauma and bring it to the fire, which is essentially the work that we're doing in trauma talks and in our trauma to transformation workshops. And I will leave you with this quote from his book, The Wonder of Boys. Because of their dominance by the hormone testosterone, aggression, and physical risk-taking are programmed into boys. It's important to distinguish between aggression and violence. As psychologist Aaron Kipnis has put it, violence is not hardwired into boys. Violence is taught. Aggression is hardwired. So let's embody and embrace the aggression of men and the aggression nurturance, and let's find ways to make this aggression channeled into a healthy way. And that means fatherhood, mentorship, and coaching, and bringing the men back into the world where they can educate and guide our young men into the great people that they already are. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, share, and visit our website at compassionprisonproject.org, where you can find more information about helping us transform the prison system. As I'm beginning to say on all my podcasts, shift happens, and the shift is happening. Thank you so much for watching.